The wind howled like a hungry wolf, biting at the canvas of Sarah's wagon. Snow swirled, blurring the already indistinct horizon. It was late November, and the unforgiving Wyoming winter had arrived with a vengeance. Sarah clutched her baby, Hope, tighter, the thin blanket offering little protection against the bone-chilling cold. Sarah was a young woman, barely 20, with fiery red hair and determined green eyes that reflected both fear and unwavering resolve. She had left behind a comfortable life back east, drawn west by the promise of land and a fresh start after losing her husband to illness. Hope, just 6 months old, was her everything. The journey had been arduous, the wagon train slowly dwindling as families peeled off to stake their claims. Now, Sarah was alone, miles from the nearest settlement, with only the vast, frozen wilderness for company. The sun, a pale disk behind the heavy clouds, offered little warmth. She knew she had to find shelter soon, or they wouldn't survive the night. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind seemed determined to rip the very wagon apart. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. Just as Sarah urged her weary oxen forward, hoping to reach a stand of trees she had spotted earlier, a sickening crack echoed through the frozen air. The wagon lurched violently, throwing Sarah against the side. With a sinking heart, she knew what had happened. A wheel had broken. One of the spokes splintered beyond repair. Despair washed over her. The wagon was her only shelter, her only means of carrying supplies. Now, stranded in the middle of nowhere, she felt utterly defeated. Hope began to cry, sensing her mother's distress. Sarah held her close, whispering soothing words, trying to reassure both the baby and herself. She climbed down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the deep snow. Examining the broken wheel, she realized the situation was even worse than she had imagined. The wood was rotten, weakened by the harsh weather. She had no spare wheel and no tools capable of fixing this kind of damage. They were truly stuck. The vast, white landscape seemed to mock her helplessness, the wind whistling a mournful tune. Days blurred into a desperate struggle for survival. Sarah rationed their dwindling supplies of food and water, knowing they wouldn't last long. She tried to repair the wheel, using strips of leather and pieces of wood salvaged from the wagon, but her efforts were futile. The makeshift repairs wouldn't hold, not even for a mile. The cold was relentless. She burned what little firewood she had, desperately trying to keep Hope warm. Each night, the temperature plummeted, and Sarah feared they wouldn't make it through until morning. She wrapped Hope in every blanket she owned, huddling together for warmth. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she refused to eat more than a few bites, saving the rest for Hope. The baby's cries grew weaker each day, a chilling reminder of their precarious situation. Sarah began to lose hope. She prayed for a miracle, for someone to find them, but the vast wilderness remained silent and indifferent. The snow continued to fall, burying the wagon deeper and deeper, isolating them further from the world. She started feeling alone and scared. Was he a threat? Was he coming to harm them? She instinctively clutched Hope tighter, shielding her from the perceived danger. She remembered the warnings from other travelers. Stay away from Apache territory, they had said. They're savages. He had been tracking a herd of elk when he noticed the unusual sight, a canvas-covered wagon, stranded and seemingly abandoned. Curiosity and something more drew him closer. He saw the woman emerge from the wagon, her red hair a bright splash of color against the white landscape. He noticed her gaunt face, her weary movements, and the way she constantly clutched something close to her chest. Then he saw it, a small bundle, a baby. Kai's heart stirred. He had a sister once, and he remembered the fierce protectiveness she had shown towards her own children. He understood the woman's fear. He knew how his people were perceived by the settlers. But he also saw her desperation, her vulnerability. He knew that without help, she and the baby wouldn't last much longer in this unforgiving wilderness. A conflict waged within him, duty to his tribe versus the instinct to help those in need. Kai knew his decision would not be easy to explain to his people. Helping a white woman went against everything they had come to believe. The settlers had stolen their land, broken their treaties, and slaughtered their families. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. But Kai couldn't ignore the pleading look in the woman's eyes, the fragility of the baby in her arms. He knew that if he turned away, they would surely die. The memory of his sister and her children haunted him. He couldn't let another innocent life be lost to the harshness of the world. He made his decision. He would help them, but he would have to be careful. He couldn't reveal his identity to the other settlers, not yet. He would have to approach her cautiously, showing her that he meant no harm. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. He adjusted the blanket on his shoulders, a symbol of his heritage, a heritage he was about to risk for two strangers. He started down the ridge, towards the broken-down wagon, towards Sarah and Hope. Kai approached the wagon slowly, deliberately, giving Sarah ample time to see him and assess his intentions. He kept his hands visible away from his weapons. He dismounted a good distance away and left his horse ground-tied, a clear sign that he wasn't planning a hasty retreat or an attack. As he walked, he spoke softly in his native tongue, a calming melody meant to soothe rather than intimidate. He knew Sarah wouldn't understand the words, but he hoped the tone would convey his peaceful intentions. He carried no visible weapons, only a small pouch at his side, likely containing supplies. He focused on her eyes, trying to communicate his sincerity. He knew she was frightened. He could see it in her posture, in the way she clutched the baby so tightly. He stopped several yards from the wagon, giving her space. He raised his hands, palms open, a universal gesture of peace. He waited patiently for her reaction, for any sign that she might trust him, even just a little. The wind howled around them, carrying his soft words away, leaving only the silent plea in his eyes. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear warred with a desperate hope. The story she had heard painted the Apache as ruthless killers, but the man standing before her didn't seem to fit that description. His movements were slow and deliberate, his hands open and empty. Yet, ingrained prejudice was hard to overcome. She clutched Hope tighter, her knuckles white. The baby stirred in her arms, whimpering softly. Sarah's gaze flickered between Kai and her daughter. Hope's face was flushed, her breathing shallow. She needed warmth, food, and medicine, things Sarah couldn't provide on her own. Doubt gnawed at her. Could she trust this man? Was it a trick? But what choice did she have? They were running out of time. If she refused his help, they would surely die. The baby's weak cries seemed to plead with her, urging her to take a chance. Against her better judgment, against all the warnings she had received, a flicker of hope ignited within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this Apache warrior was her only chance for survival. Kai watched as Sarah struggled with her decision. He could see the fear in her eyes, the distrust etched on her face. He knew he had to do something to break through the barrier, to show her that he truly meant no harm. He slowly reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out a small piece of flint and steel. He pointed to the small, almost extinguished fire pit near the wagon. He gestured towards the meager pile of firewood, then mimed striking the flint, creating a spark. He repeated the action several times, emphasizing his intention. He wanted to show her that he could help her keep the fire going, that he could provide warmth for the baby. The fire was crucial for their survival. Without it, they would freeze. Sarah understood his gesture immediately. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding replacing some of the fear. She watched as he carefully demonstrated the technique, his movements precise and efficient. He then offered the flint and steel to her, stepping back to give her space. It was a small gesture, but it was a start, a chance to prove his goodwill, a chance for Sarah to begin to trust. Hesitantly, Sarah reached out and took the flint and steel from Kai's outstretched hand. The metal was cold against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth she desperately craved. She looked at him, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded encouragingly, pointing again to the fire pit. With trembling hands, she gathered some dry twigs and placed them carefully in the pit. She struck the flint again and again, but only a few weak sparks flew. Her hands were numb with cold, her movements clumsy. Kai watched patiently, offering no assistance, allowing her to try on her own. Finally, after several attempts, a tiny spark caught, igniting a small flame. Sarah shielded it with her hands, nurturing it until it grew stronger. A wave of relief washed over her as the warmth spread through her body. She looked up at Kai, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in days. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a small act of kindness that had eased her immediate worries and, perhaps, begun to melt the ice of her fear. She whispered a faint, "Thank you." The simple, "thank you," was the only English word Kai understood. He nodded, acknowledging her gratitude, but their communication remained a challenge. He spoke to her in his native Apache tongue, explaining his intentions, but she only stared back, her brow furrowed in confusion. Sarah tried to ask him questions. "Who are you? What do you want?" But her words were met with a blank stare. They were two people from different worlds, separated by a vast chasm of language and culture. They resorted to gestures, pointing and miming to convey their meaning. Kai pointed to the broken wheel, then mimed the act of fixing it, hoping she would understand that he could help. Sarah, in turn, pointed to Hope, then rubbed her stomach, indicating that they needed food. It was a clumsy, inefficient process, but it was the only way they could communicate. A shared smile, a raised eyebrow, a shake of the head, these became their language. They learned to read each other's expressions, to interpret the subtle nuances of their body language. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to understand each other, despite the language barrier. The need for survival was, for the moment, enough. The next morning, Kai began to work on the broken wheel. He examined it carefully, assessing the damage. Sarah watched him, fascinated by his skill and knowledge. He used his knife to carefully carve new pieces of wood, shaping them to fit the broken spokes. He used strips of rawhide to bind the pieces together, creating a surprisingly strong and sturdy repair. Sarah had tried to fix the wheel herself, but her efforts had been clumsy and ineffective. Kai, on the other hand, seemed to possess an innate understanding of wood and its properties. He worked with a quiet confidence, his movements precise and efficient. He scavenged metal scraps from around the wagon and fashioned makeshift braces, reinforcing the repaired spokes. Sarah was amazed by his ingenuity, by his ability to create something useful from almost nothing. She began to see him not as a savage as she had been taught, but as a skilled craftsman, a resourceful survivor. With each passing hour, her respect for him grew, and her fear diminished. The wheel slowly started to look like it could hold. Days turned into a rhythm of shared work and quiet companionship. Kai continued to repair the wheel, while Sarah gathered firewood and prepared simple meals from their dwindling supplies. They worked side by side, their movements coordinated despite the lack of verbal communication. Hope, in her innocent way, became a bridge between them. Kai would often pause in his work to smile at the baby, making faces and gentle sounds that always brought a giggle to her lips. Sarah, in turn, would show Kai how to hold and soothe Hope, demonstrating the proper way to swaddle her and burp her after feeding. These small interactions, these moments of shared humanity, helped to break down the barriers of fear and prejudice. Sarah began to see Kai not just as an Apache warrior, but as a man with his own skills, his own kindness, his own capacity for love. Kai, in turn, saw Sarah not just as a white woman, but as a mother, fiercely protective of her child, struggling to survive in a harsh and unforgiving world. The trust grew stronger each day. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, Kai sat beside the fire, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Sarah watched him curious. He drew pictures of horses, of people, of teepees clustered together. He pointed to the drawings, then to himself, then to the distant mountains. Slowly, Sarah began to understand. He was telling her about his people, about their way of life, about their connection to the land. He drew pictures of soldiers, of burning villages, of people being forced from their homes. His face grew somber, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. Sarah realized that he was sharing his story, his tribe's story, a story of loss and suffering. It was a story that echoed her own, a story of hardship and resilience. She understood then that they were not so different after all. They had both experienced pain, they had both lost loved ones, they were both fighting to survive. The drawings in the dirt became a powerful testament to their shared humanity, breaking down the last vestiges of prejudice and fear. She saw Kai not just as a rescuer, but as a fellow human being burdened by his own history, yet still willing to offer kindness to a stranger. The fragile peace they had found was shattered by the sudden arrival of a fierce blizzard. The wind howled with renewed fury, driving snow horizontally across the landscape. The temperature plummeted, and the air became thick with swirling white. The wagon, even with Kai's repairs, offered little protection against the storm's wrath. Kai knew they couldn't stay in the wagon. They needed shelter, something more substantial. He gestured to Sarah, pointing toward a rocky outcrop a short distance away. He mimed the action of crawling into a small space, hoping she would understand. Sarah hesitated. Leaving the wagon meant venturing out into the full force of the blizzard, but she knew Kai was right. The wagon wouldn't hold for long. She bundled Hope tightly in blankets, and, with Kai leading the way, they braved the storm. The wind tore at them, making it difficult to see or breathe. The snow stung their faces, and the cold seeped into their bones. It was a desperate race against the elements, a test of their newfound bond. They finally reached the rocky outcrop, a small cave offering a sliver of protection from the storm's fury. The cave was small and cramped, barely big enough for the three of them to huddle together. Kai managed to start a small fire, using the last of their dry tinder and some small branches he found near the entrance. The fire provided a meager amount of warmth, but it was enough to ward off the worst of the cold. They huddled together, sharing body heat and offering each other comfort. The storm raged outside, but inside the cave, a sense of peace settled over them. Sarah, remembering stories from her childhood, began to tell Kai tales of her life back east, of green meadows and sunny days. Kai, in turn, shared stories of his people, of their reverence for nature, of their traditions and beliefs. He spoke in his native tongue, but Sarah understood the essence of his words, the deep connection he felt to his heritage. They couldn't understand each other's words, but in the darkness of the cave, they found a common language of shared experience and human connection. They were no longer just a white woman and an Apache warrior. They were two souls seeking solace in the face of adversity. As the blizzard raged on, Sarah noticed that Hope was becoming increasingly listless. Her skin felt hot to the touch, and her breathing was labored. A deep cough racked her small body, stealing her breath away. Fear gripped Sarah's heart. She knew that Hope was sick, and she had nothing to treat her with. She held the baby close, rocking her gently and whispering soothing words, but nothing seemed to help. Hope's cries grew weaker, and her eyes fluttered closed. Sarah's desperation grew with each passing moment. She felt helpless, watching her baby slip away. She looked at Kai, her eyes pleading for help. He examined Hope, his brow furrowed with concern. He felt her forehead, listened to her chest, and observed her breathing. He shook his head gravely, indicating that the situation was serious. Sarah's heart sank. She knew that if they didn't do something soon, Hope wouldn't survive the night. The blizzard trapped them, and time was running out. The only person who could help may be the Apache warrior. Kai, despite the howling wind and driving snow, ventured out of the cave. Sarah watched him, fear etched on her face. Where was he going? Was he abandoning them? He disappeared into the storm, leaving Sarah alone with her sick baby, her hope dwindling with each passing moment. After what seemed like an eternity, Kai returned, his face red with cold, his hands cupped protectively. He knelt beside Sarah and carefully opened his hands, revealing a small collection of dried herbs and roots. He pointed to the herbs, then to Hope, then mimed the action of grinding and mixing them. Sarah watched in amazement as Kai used a flat stone and a smaller rock to crush the herbs into a fine powder. He then mixed the powder with a small amount of melted snow, creating a thick paste. He gently opened Hope's mouth and placed a small amount of the paste on her tongue. He pointed to the baby, then to the sky, indicating that he was praying for her recovery. It was his knowledge of the land that offered this hope. The night was long and filled with worry. Sarah stayed awake, constantly checking on Hope, praying for a sign of improvement. Kai, despite his own exhaustion, kept the fire burning, his presence a silent reassurance. Slowly, as the hours passed, Hope's fever began to break. Her breathing became easier and her cough subsided. She stirred in her sleep, a faint smile gracing her lips. Sarah's heart swelled with relief. The herbs had worked. Kai's knowledge had saved her baby's life. When Hope finally woke, she was weak but alert. She looked at Sarah and smiled, reaching out her tiny hand. Sarah held her close, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Kai, her eyes filled with gratitude. He nodded, his own eyes reflecting a sense of shared relief. Hope's recovery became a symbol of their growing bond, a testament to the power of compassion and understanding. The shared experience of fearing for Hope's life and celebrating her recovery had forged a connection between them that was stronger than any cultural difference or preconceived notion. The blizzard still raged, but inside the cave, a sense of hope had been rekindled. When the blizzard finally subsided, the landscape was transformed. The world was covered in a thick blanket of pristine white snow, glistening under the pale winter sun. The air was crisp and clean, and a sense of quiet peace settled over the land. It was time to move on. Kai indicated that he would guide them the rest of the way. He knew the trails, the safest routes through the mountains. With the repaired wagon wheel holding, they packed their belongings and resumed their journey west. Kai led the way on horseback, scouting ahead and ensuring their path was clear. The terrain was treacherous, the snow-covered trails winding through steep mountain passes and across frozen rivers. Sarah, with renewed hope and a growing trust in Kai, followed his lead, her heart filled with gratitude. They faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They still couldn't speak each other's language, but the shared experiences and their combined dedication to survival made their communication easier and more meaningful. They felt safe as long as they were together. Their journey was far from easy. They faced numerous obstacles along the way. One day, a pack of wolves, driven by hunger, surrounded the wagon. Kai, with his bow and arrow, skillfully defended them, driving the wolves away before they could cause any harm. Sarah, terrified but grateful, clutched Hope close, thankful for Kai's bravery. Another time, they had to cross a fast-flowing, ice-cold river. The water was deep, and the current was strong. Kai carefully guided the oxen, testing the depth with his staff, ensuring they didn't lose their footing. Sarah, holding Hope high above the water, walked alongside the wagon, her legs numb with cold. They worked together, each relying on the other's strengths. Kai's knowledge of the land and his skills as a warrior were invaluable. Sarah's determination and her unwavering love for Hope kept them going, even when they were exhausted and discouraged. These dangers brought them closer, forging an unbreakable bond based on mutual respect and unwavering support. Each success built the confidence of both. One day, they came across another group of pioneers heading in the same direction. Sarah felt a surge of relief at the sight of familiar faces, but her relief quickly turned to apprehension. She knew how most settlers viewed the Apache. As they approached the other wagons, the pioneers stopped, their faces etched with suspicion and distrust. Their eyes narrowed as they took in Kai's appearance, his traditional clothing, his long dark hair. Murmurs of fear and hostility rippled through the group. "What's he doing with you, ma'am?" one of the men asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Is he holding you against your will?" Others began to reach for their rifles, their gazes fixed on Kai. Sarah knew she had to say something to defend Kai, but she was afraid of what the others would think, afraid of the potential for violence. She told them about the broken wagon wheel, about the blizzard, about Hope's illness, and about Kai's unwavering kindness and skill. She described how he had repaired the wagon, guided them through the mountains, and healed her baby with his knowledge of herbs. "He's not a savage," she insisted, her voice rising with passion. "He's a good man, a brave man, and a true friend. He is our guide. He has risked everything to help us. We owe him our lives." Her words, spoken with such sincerity and emotion, had a visible impact on the pioneers. Some lowered their rifles, their expressions softening. Others remained skeptical, but the tide had begun to turn. Sarah had stood up for Kai, defying their prejudice and asserting his value, not just as a guide, but as a human being. Her voice echoed through the valley. Despite Sarah's impassioned defense, Kai knew that the pioneers' prejudices would not disappear overnight. He saw the lingering suspicion in their eyes, the unease in their movements. He understood that his presence would continue to be a source of tension and potential conflict, putting Sarah and Hope at risk. That night, as they sat by the fire, Kai made a difficult decision. He realized that the best way to protect Sarah and Hope was to leave them. He knew he couldn't change the way the pioneers viewed him, and he wouldn't allow his presence to jeopardize their safety. He tried to explain his decision to Sarah, using gestures and drawings in the dirt. He pointed to the other pioneers, then to himself, then shook his head, indicating that it was not safe for him to stay. He pointed to Sarah and Hope, then drew a circle around them, signifying his desire to protect them. The look on his face spoke volumes. Sarah understood, her heart heavy with sadness. She knew he was right, but the thought of parting ways with him filled her with a deep sense of loss. The safety of his friends meant his decision was final. She couldn't express her gratitude in words, but her eyes conveyed everything she felt. She squeezed his hand tightly, a silent thank you for all he had done. Kai returned her gaze, his own eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and affection. He reached out and gently touched Hope's cheek, stroking her soft skin. He smiled at her, a tender, loving smile that transcended all language barriers. He knew he would never forget this woman and this child. He then stepped back, releasing Sarah's hand. He nodded once, a silent farewell, and turned to leave. Sarah watched him go, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. A deep connection had formed between them, a connection that defied all expectations and prejudices. A silent thank you, her heart filled with love and gratitude. Kai mounted his horse and turned towards the vast wilderness. He paused for a moment, looking back at Sarah and Hope, his gaze lingering on their faces. He knew he was leaving them in good hands, in the hands of a strong and determined woman. Then, with a final nod, he turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the snow-covered hills. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with sadness, but also filled with a sense of gratitude and respect. She knew she would never forget him, the brave Apache warrior who had risked everything to save them. She turned back to the wagon, to Hope, and to the long journey ahead. She was alone again, but she was no longer the same woman who had been stranded in the wilderness weeks before. She was stronger, more resilient, and filled with a renewed sense of hope. Kai had given her more than just survival. He had given her a new perspective on life, a new understanding of humanity. She knew now that anything was possible, as long as she had the courage to face it. She knew she would survive. As Sarah continued her journey west, she had time to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about her initial fear of Kai, fueled by the prejudices she had absorbed from others. She realized how wrong she had been, how easily she had judged him based on his appearance and his heritage. She understood now the importance of kindness, of understanding, of breaking down the barriers that separated people. She had learned that true strength lay not in weapons or power, but in compassion and empathy. She knew she could never again judge someone based on their background or their beliefs. Kai had taught her a valuable lesson, a lesson that would stay with her for the rest of her life. He had shown her that humanity transcended all boundaries, that kindness could bridge even the widest divides. She resolved to carry that lesson with her, to teach it to Hope, and to share it with everyone she met. The journey will continue to be difficult, but with a new heart. She was ready. After several more days of travel, Sarah and Hope finally reached their destination, a small, dusty town nestled in a valley between the mountains. It wasn't much, just a handful of buildings clustered around a general store and a saloon, but it was a haven, a place to start anew. As they rode into town, the townsfolk stopped to stare, their faces etched with curiosity and suspicion. Sarah, remembering her own prejudices, offered them a warm smile, determined to make a good impression. She found a small cabin on the outskirts of town and began to settle in, unpacking her meager belongings and making it a home for herself and Hope. Life in the town was hard, but Sarah was determined to make it work. She took on odd jobs, washing clothes, mending fences, and helping out at the general store. She worked tirelessly, her love for Hope driving her forward. She knew that she could build a good life for her and Hope here, a life filled with love, kindness, and understanding. She had arrived at her destination with a story to tell. Sarah never forgot Kai. His bravery, his kindness, and his unwavering humanity left an indelible mark on her soul. She often told Hope stories about him, about his skill as a craftsman, his knowledge of the land, and his gentle spirit. She taught Hope about the importance of acceptance and respect for all people, regardless of their background or their beliefs. She explained how easily people could be misled by prejudice and fear, and how important it was to look beyond the surface and see the humanity in everyone. She shared the story of Kai's people, of their history of loss and displacement, of their deep connection to the land. She spoke out against prejudice and injustice, challenging the stereotypes and misconceptions that divided people. She organized events that brought together settlers and Native Americans, fostering dialogue and understanding. She became a bridge between two worlds, just as her mother and Kai had been. She never forgot the story of Kai, the brave Apache warrior who had saved her life. She shared his story with everyone she met, reminding them that kindness and compassion could transcend all boundaries. She taught the children in the town about the importance of respecting all people, regardless of their background. She vowed to continue the dream. She helped to build a better world, a world of understanding, a world of peace, a world of hope. Now an old woman, Sarah sat on the porch of her small house, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange, pink, and purple. Her silver hair framed a face etched with the wisdom of a life well lived. Hope, now a grown woman with children of her own, sat beside her, holding her hand. As she gazed at the sunset, Sarah's thoughts drifted back to that fateful winter in Wyoming, to the broken wagon wheel, the relentless blizzard, and the unexpected arrival of Kai. She remembered his kindness, his bravery, his unwavering humanity. She realized that that experience had changed her life forever. It had taught her the importance of looking beyond appearances, of breaking down prejudices, of embracing the unexpected bonds of humanity. She squeezed Hope's hand, a silent thank you for carrying on her legacy, for spreading the message of understanding and peace. The world needed to hear it. She smiled, knowing that Kai's spirit lived on, not just in her heart, but in the hearts of all those whose lives she and Hope had touched. The setting sun glowed. The end.